We talk about grandparents. Very nice subject. I just want to say, for those of you who have not yet heard, the picture behind me is my husband's parents, the grandparents in our family. And it was drawn or painted by one of our children, who is now the grandchildren. So for me, I thought it was a good, appropriate one to bring tonight. And so grandparents is really a blessing from the Lord. I think that whole continuance of generation after generation thing, and the more we think about it now in terms of everything in our life, the more special it becomes to me in every aspect, that whole thing of generational continuance. So being a grandparent, if you've watched grandparents and their grandchildren are born, it is amazing. I remember when our first child was born and my father, he came into the office that morning and he said to his staff, "Can you see anything different on me?" And they were like, "No, you have a new suit. No, you have a new tie. No, you had a haircut. No, your shoes on you." He said, "Can't you see I'm a grandfather?" It was like, "Can't you see it?" And she was born that in the middle of the previous night, 10 to 12, so it was impossible for them in the middle of the week, I think Wednesday night, so they couldn't be there. And he drove straight after work that afternoon. He got my mum into the car. They drove for 2 hours straight. They came in for visiting hours. They saw me and they saw the baby, and they got back into the car and they drove back 2 hours so that they could still be in bed and have a good rest before the following day. 4 hours in one evening just to see their first grandchild. I think it said such a lot to me of how important it is and what a blessing it is to be a grandparent. And I'll never forget his face and the way the grandmothers, obviously, they don't even try to hide it. But my father wasn't the emotional type, but I could just see how special it was and how it just changed something for them. And I think it's part of that continuance of the generations. There's a popular quote that says, "If I knew how much fun grandchildren would be, I would have had them first." So I think there's a time when parents, when they read that, they think, "Oh, you're right." But it is a funny thing that grandparents, and I asked a grandmother today and I said, "Well, I'm talking about grandparents tonight, so what can you add and what can you tell me about it, because we're not quite there yet." And she said, "I don't have to be so strict. I can just enjoy them." And I think that's the most important part is I can enjoy the best part of them. And actually, she looks after her grandchildren. 2 of them she practically raised, went through every day while the parents are working. So she looked after them as babies with her hard work and everything, but she still said, it's special and I so enjoy them. I don't feel like I'm just doing this hard work, and when they are difficult, I can actually give them back. Don't have to have them 24/7. It's the enjoyment that they get out of that. I think having a grandparent is also an equal blessing. I remember with my grandfather, my one grandfather died when I was 5 years old, so I didn't have much of him. But I still remember until today small things. I remember sitting at the table next to him and trying to, I have a thing about eating my plate very clean. And I kind of noticed that he was doing the same thing. And it was like, oh wow. I mean, I was so young and noticing that. And then he saw the same thing and it became this competition thing. And he was much older. My father is one of the younger children, and it was so special, just that special something that we had with each other. And so I remember after my father died, the kids finally told us that my grandfather had a way. I always tell people, he would come and stand next to you. He had one of those, they call it those sports jackets, flannel jackets they used to call it. I think they kind of in fashion and out of fashion, but in those days they had them. And he would come stand next to me and to all the grandchildren and say, "Put your hand in my pocket." And then we could put our hands in, and there would be some of those hard-boiled sweets with a soft, fruity centers. But now, that would happen, especially at the times when he would see we would become a little bit fuzzy. You know, it was just before lunch, but it's not yet ready, and we're getting hungry now, but you know, the women wouldn't have us have anything because otherwise we wouldn't eat the food. And now my grandmother is very, very into this food thing. I mean, we must now eat our food. So he would come around. He was a bit naughty with that. And he would come around and we could put our hands in, and small things we remember. And then he would when he sees now things are getting out of hand now, and there's maybe a lot of us, then he tells my grandmother, I'm taking them to the park and buying myself a newspaper, but I'll keep them busy for you so you can finish up. And then he takes us with, not just for the newspaper, we go past the park first, and he buys us all ice cream. So those were very special outings, but of course, having ice cream just before lunch, it wasn't very good. So if Grandma started fuzzing, he would just wink at us, and we all knew why we couldn't eat our food. But he kind of just enjoyed it. It was such fun for him. He would never have done that with his own children, but just the fun and remembering that afterwards. And when my father died, for the first time, we were told that he did the same with our children. He was there with my grandfather, and he wasn't a man of many words. My grandfather was more that kind of, but he took the same habit, and he did the same with our kids. But they never said a word. We didn't know until he wasn't there anymore. And just that special things that grandparents can do, and that you have that special memories of them and doing things with them that your parents can't always do. I think for grandparents, it's that innocence, that purity, that awe of life that young children. I think we're all like that. We're all like little children and seeing the way they experience life. And then you look at them and suddenly you see it through their eyes, and it makes it new for you. And for grandparents who are older and have seen life, and yeah, well, that's it. But to see it through someone young's eyes, and to just see the excitement again about something silly and you know, something really ordinary, and what a fuss they make and how exciting it is to them, just add excitement to any person's life, and especially the older people. They love the little kids for that. I think that's, for me, one of the reasons, I think. There's a scripture in Proverbs 17 verse 6 that says, children's children are the crown of old men, and the glory of children is their fathers. But that children's children are the crown of old men. It's a special blessing to be able to live until the age where you can experience your grandchildren. I think it's really a blessing from the Lord. And when I look around me, I see some older people who are so negative about life, and then you see others who so enjoy everything, and everything is still a blessing. And I think it's also a decision that you make to never stop enjoying life, and to see how people can just enjoy being still there, even though you don't always feel so well and you can't always do whatever you had to do. There are other things that you can now do, and that's part of your benefits for that stage that you can enjoy. I want to look back at the development phases just to point that out. I did not add it at the beginning, and actually I was asked, but this is actually for me part as a specific stage in our lives. That when our children are married and they are in the adult phase, when the grandchildren comes, then we move on as grandparents, and we become grandparents, and that's a specific phase in our lives. Remember we said about the feast that we have at each phase, and to make something special of it. I think it's a good idea for children, when all the children are grown and out of the home, for the children to organize a feast for their parents. A way of blessing their parents. Until that phase, the parents have done the blessing. They've always been the ones saying, oh, you know, blessing them and just doing all the things. And now for the children, because they are now adults, to stand up and say, we want to bless you as parents, and we want to thank you, and we honor you for these things in your life, and to have a feast for them, to recognize them, and to show your honor and your respect for your parents. I think it's a very special thing. So you can wait until all the children are out of the home, or you can wait until the grandchildren come, whichever you want. But I do think, just try and do that as a specific way, spend some money, make it special. It's a special time of coming together, all the children, no matter how many children you are, and to thank your parents that they've raised you and that what they've given you and what you see in them, what you respect in them, what they've taught you, things you remember about them. And some things are amusing and others are more serious, but to have a feast to honor them for that. So there are certain things that grandparents can bring to the relationship. Grandparents obviously have lived some time and they have wisdom. They have wisdom that we don't always have yet, or that younger people don't always have yet. This is scripture, if you look under paragraph 15 verse 2, there's that scripture, no, it's actually here under the wisdom, sorry. Where, now it's gone, that scripture. No, it is there. In 1 Kings 12 verse 8. I think it's Jeroboam after Solomon, the son of Solomon, and he was now taking over the kingdom. But God said, because of Solomon and because of Solomon not serving him all his days, he will take away part of the kingdom from him. Because of David, his servant, he will not take everything from Solomon's children, because he promised David there would always be a king, but he will take part of it. And now Jeroboam went to the older people, to the elders, and then he went to his friends. And it says he left the counsel of the old men which they had advised him, and talked with the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. And then he answered the people roughly, and he left the old men's advice which they advised him. And you know, sometimes things change, and there are certain subjects or things that older people may not know so much about. We live in a generation where the computer came in, and I remember my husband's father, he retired because of the computer. He said, no, he's tried enough new things, and it's about time for him to retire, and he really doesn't feel like studying a whole new thing like that. He didn't want to do that. He just decided, no, he's too old. So we can think they are not so intelligent and not so clever, you know, they don't know about all these wonderful new things we have. But the wisdom that grandparents have is not always the knowledge, it's wisdom. It's applied knowledge. They've lived life, and they've seen which things work and which don't work. Oh, they still make their mistakes. They're human and they make mistakes, and they don't always know, they don't always have all the answers. But they have some wisdom that we don't always have. And sometimes, even because of their mistakes, they will say, you know what? Don't try that. I've done that, and this is the price it cost me. So don't go that way. You will get, mud on your face, or what's it saying? Don't try that. So, and we often try to invent the wheel again and again and again in each generation. And I think also because we do not honor the relationships. Now, I'm not saying that people are perfect. Far from it. I'm not saying that they always have advice for you about everything, but they do have wisdom. And I think there's a way of honoring them for the wisdom that you do get from them, and getting that, especially with the younger children. They have time for us, and especially for the grandchildren, to teach them that wisdom, to be there for them when we work. They can be there. We're getting to that also later, but I think when we talk about time, it's, they most probably, the grandparents are retired when the grandchildren are growing up, especially when they start understanding. Mostly the grandparents have retired, or if not, they don't have other children in the home anymore that they have to look after, so they do have more time. They are, and I was thinking about it and asking a few people, and just the fact that you become older, things start going slower again, which means that it's not just the time, it's that patience, that way of sitting down, and it's no longer, oh, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. You don't find that thing with grandparents. Oh no, come sit down, we talk about it, come sit down, we can talk. They find time, they make time. And it's an important thing. It's a thing that we don't always see the value of it. We don't always cherish it. And even if we can just expose our children, the grandchildren in other words, to that wisdom, I think it's good for them. They have an input in grandchildren's lives that we cannot always have. Even though we have the children with us all the time, and even though we don't always see eye to eye with our parents on everything in life, they have wisdom that they can expose the grandchildren to, and we should give them that opportunity. They can help in lots of practical ways. They have that time and patience. I remember my grandmother could knit incredibly well. She baked incredibly well. There are just certain things that you remember about them, things that I learned from her that my mother didn't know. There are things that my mom taught my grandmother. So we all have something to bring to the equation, but to see what can that person give me and to go and tap into that. In one of the previous sessions we had that, open your heart for me and I will let my spirit flow into you. Open your heart and I will let my spirit flow into you. And I think it's that thing, that opening up of your being so that you can tap that thing that someone has for you, that wisdom in the sense of grandparents. Something that I want to mention specifically that's been with me through many years. I remember since when I could start understanding, and my mother started telling me about her grandmother, or one of her grandmothers, that she remembers specifically was known for how much she would pray for the family. Now, if you think back of that specific grandmother, it was my mother's grandmother. So, and she was obviously a little girl when this woman lived, and she was known for how much she would pray. Now, if I could just put it like that, my grandmother, I think, met the Lord only later in her life, living a godly life, but not always living the reality of it. And only even after my mother got to know the Lord, she came to the Lord. And but the children came, her own children came. The grandparents, are my mother's generation, are all serving the Lord. At least my mother and her siblings and all their husbands. And then us as the grandchildren, I know that especially my mother and that specific family, those grandchildren, I know of all of them that they all serve the Lord, definitely. And now most of the great-great-grandchildren, we are now in that generation where my children are, and most of them are already have a good. You can see there are those who do not yet are still maybe too young. So it is an incredible thing that one person, the effect they can have on a family. And that time, I remember one of our friends who was an elderly woman in a congregation that we were involved, and she had much problems with her legs. Later on, she could not move at all. She could not walk. And she was living in an old age home in a room, and but she was the matron of hostels, youth, school hostels previously when she worked. And all around her room, all the walls were covered with pictures and photos of not just her children and grandchildren, but all the children over the years that she'd been praying for. And she would daily, she would pray for them. One by one, she would daily pray for all those people who by then were grown-ups with their own children and their own lives because she'd grown so much older. And I realized that resource that we have of time when we are older, and to make use of it, to specifically remind our parents, pray for us, pray for the grandchildren, even if they don't always know the specifics, but pray for them. And I think it's an amazing thing. Yes, they have resources. Some of the other courses we do, you know about Moneywise and about how we discovered the importance of finances. And the more we look around us, the sadder I become when I see older people who do not have enough resources, because I think it was God's plan that the elderly who now are grandparents should have the resources to help with specific things. Not just the raising of children part, but sometimes the extra things that the parents' finances cannot yet reach. So to come in and see maybe a specific gift in a child's life, to be able to pay for specific tuition that is maybe too expensive for the parent, but you can really see the potential. To maybe in a case of a sick child, to be able to pay for specific expenses that the parents cannot do. And I think it's such a privilege. It's such a blessing to be able to do that. My grandparents specifically, the one on the one side, lived in deep into their 80s. And they were so involved in our lives, and they were so involved in doing specific things where they saw a need, and they would come in and they would say, well, I see, can we help you with this, and can we give you this? And they would look out for not necessarily huge things, but they would be there and they would give that extra resources that's sometimes needed. That's something really amazing. I think the word says in Proverbs 13, verse 22, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. So Arno will come speak in the second session specifically on finances, and he will most probably also mention the scripture. But I really want to say about it, if you think about your children's children, to leave an inheritance for them, how many people do that? How many people do you know who even plan for that or talk about it? We didn't know about it. I mean, that scripture has been in the Bible for thousands of years, and we didn't know about it. Well, you read it and you don't even think about it. And just to start thinking, because if you plan to leave something for your children, you have to plan. You have to be specific, and you have to leave it in such a way that it reaches them. You don't just have to eat it up yourself in your elderly years. And then if you want to leave something beyond your children, you might not even be there when your grandchildren need it. In other words, to leave it in such a way that it reaches them in the first place, you really have to plan. You really have to think about them, and you have to plan for it. Otherwise, it will not reach the grandchildren. But the word says in the scripture, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. So we should really start thinking more about finances and how the way we live and the way we plan for the generations to come. Not just, I think, in our own finances. I mean, the world is now in a place where everyone starts realizing, we are making a mess of this world. We are really destroying it in so many aspects because of our own greed. And to think, but there are generations to come that still have to live on this earth. What are we leaving them? What are we doing to help them have a better place to live in? Or are we just thinking we want it now and we want it, and to just eat up those resources and use it up for our own benefit? But to live in that unselfishness again of, it's not just mine, I'm just lending it, borrowing it for a moment until I move on, and then others are left with what? What did I leave for them? So that resources to be responsible with it, to know what you're doing and to know how we are living. Grandparents create a loving, dependable support system. If I look back at raising our children, I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that I made. Not making more use of that support system. Well, my father was very ill at the time when our children were young, and it wasn't always so easy, and there were other children still in the home, and they had responsibilities still. But and we had a bit more of that thing with my father and mother-in-law, and they could help out a bit more. But I think I should have just made use of it more. I think grandparents, in spite of whatever responsibilities and whatever things they are going through, they want that time with the grandchildren and to give it to them. I know people who the grandchildren almost every holiday to the grandparents on their farm, and they have a lovely time, and it's like almost a time out, I think, for the parents as well, and to spend time together, and it's something that the grandkids look forward to. They enjoy being there, especially the boys. I imagine on a farm they find a lot to do with their grandfather. So there are so many ways and things that we can do. But I think I've seen with some families with children who are very sick, babies who cry because if they are really just sick and there are problems, grandparents saying, we'll come in one night a week and we'll sleep there so that you just sleep. You close your door and you don't even think you have babies. We'll look after them for this night. In your home, we're there. We'll get up, we'll give them their food, and we will rock them to sleep again, or we will walk with them. Don't worry. If we don't sleep, then that's fine, but we'll give you one night a week, the one couple, and then the other grandparents would come in for another night. But it's almost as if we've lost things like that. We don't see that so often anymore. We don't see grandparents coming in almost always. That's something that came through our generations. My mother would, or rather my grandmother first did it, and then my own mother. They would come and stay with us after a baby was born, and when I came out of the hospital, the mother came out of the hospital, to just come and be there for 4 days to a week to take over the household. Not interfere with the baby or anything. Of course, they wanted to hold them as well, but to just give that extra support once you're out of the hospital but not strong enough yet, and to take care of the older children, and to cook and even clean if necessary, and just be there, just be that support system. And we've lost that, and I think we struggle. I think we lack, we miss out, and we have to do so many more things and just try so much harder. I've heard stories about when in some situations previously with the Hebrew nation, they would, when the mother becomes pregnant even, that in those first few months she would rest and the other women would take over her responsibilities. And when the babies are born or later, there are times when they would just come in and say, no, you rest and we will take over the responsibilities. And I think we miss out a lot because of that. We just have to all have our own homes, and we have to make that run and work. And but we can still have that support system. They are there, and I think because they are they want the grandchildren. They love them so much, and if they can, and if it's safe, and if their situation is good for it, I think it's good to have them for specific times to create that for us. I've heard the expression a lot recently in certain circles, I'm the granny, not the nanny. So I asked some people about that, and the one lady actually said to me, well, I'm the granny and I'm the nanny. And I know of grandparents now, because kids, especially in winter, get so many germs, are exposed to so many things in the at maybe a daycare facility or whatever. And I know of doctors who've told the parents, if you do not take this child out of the daycare, your baby will die. I cannot treat him with another dose of antibiotics. I'm telling you now, if you don't take him home and you isolate him for a time, he's not strong enough, he will die. I'm telling you this. So I am washing my hands now if you don't take him out there. So we don't always see that. We don't, and some children are stronger than others. But they are exposed in a situation like that so much, and they are fragile. So it comes a time where there's a support system, maybe a grandmother who says, I will look after the baby for maybe that first year, or maybe for 6 months at least, and you don't have to send that child off into a daycare facility where there are so many other babies with runny noses and all that kind of things. And it's not always a bad thing, but if there is a support system, I think grandparents, some are willing to give that, and it is a sacrifice. Of course it's a sacrifice, but I think it's part of having more time and having those resources and having that special bond. It is my family. It is part of my responsibility to come in as a grandparent and to give that support. And if we can have that, it's amazing. Sometimes distance doesn't make it possible, and it's not always so easy, but yes, to help out each other as well. Good. The granny and the nanny, yeah. And I just see her face, the specific lady who, she was so excited, well, I'm the granny and the nanny, and she just raised 2 of her grandkids like that, and came time when they were older and they could go to a play school or something, and they were strong and they could go on their own, and it was fine and everyone was happy. And she said to me, well, they don't need me anymore, but I have specific play dates with my grandchildren. She said, I go, these days of the week, I go specifically to go and play with them. They know I'm coming for them, not their parents. These times I'm coming through for my grandchildren. I'm spending time with them. And I thought, wow, that's nice. Because if we all visit together as a family, if I remember back to my old days, you know, the grown-ups talk. And they have the conversation running, and the kids are in and out, but there's not that absolute concentrated attention, and that I'm doing things with you. It's me and you time now. And I see the grandparents who are doing that. I think it's amazing. I think it's really very special. And if we can do that, or if they are willing to do that, to allow them to come in and fulfill that role, not just the relationship, but as we said, that support system. Because in that time, maybe the mother can go and do the shopping, or she can just have some time off to do something special for herself. And the kids are enjoying it. Obviously, they're enjoying it. Then something that I think we've lost through from biblical times is the blessing of the generations. Do you remember when Abram and Isaac and Jacob, before they died, we read about Joseph as well. There are so many examples of that in the Old Testament. The children would be called to their deathbed even, and they would say, listen, I think it's time now. You can even remember Esau and Isaac, who blessed his two sons. And the interesting thing is, he still lived for many years after that. He lived for the entire time that Jacob was at his father-in-law Laban. And then when Jacob came back, he still saw his father. He was still alive, but he blessed him years back. And then he still lived for quite some time after that. I think it was about from age of 120 to, he became quite old, I think, 150, 170. So it was quite for some years that he still lived. But he made a specific time of blessing the next generation, of almost giving the baton over to the next generation. And I think there's something in that intentionality of giving it over, of blessing them and giving them the responsibility. And if we read those blessings, they said specific things that they saw in them, in their lives, specific gifts that they had, and that they said, I bless you because I see this and this in your life, and I thank God for this and this in your life. Nothing fancy, just what do you see, what do you experience, and then maybe what does God say to you, and to speak that blessing and that respect over your children. And we could definitely, not just on our deathbeds, obviously, we've been talking about that a lot, throughout our lives, to constantly, I mean, the Jews still have their Shabbat on a Friday evening, to do it constantly, at least once a week. I think just choose a time. I think a Sunday afternoon, Sunday meal, or times in your life. I try to sometimes on our kids' birthday, I write them special letters, and sometimes the years go too fast. You won't believe how fast years can go when people get busy. But still, try to make specific times when you bless them, when you say things over their lives. And then, like I say, definitely, I think when we see our time coming near, then to bless the next generation. For the task that lies ahead of them. Yes, and then grandparents sometimes, because of that big word, relationship, it's not always just sunshine and roses. Sometimes it tends to be a problem just because of relationships. Sometimes we have problems in our relationships before we were even married, before there's children. Sometimes because of being married and because of the grandchildren, there comes problems. Because of the in-law children that's added to the family, and there's problems. And what I've learned for myself is to see that each person is so unique, that each person has something to give, whatever that something is, and to build the relationship even if just in that area, even if I have to put distance between myself and that person in other areas, but to take that specific thing from that relationship and to allow that person to bring that thing into the relationship. Now, grandparents, on average, they want to bring the spoiling part into the relationship. So that's not difficult. And I think we should not be, if I could say that as well, not be jealous of that awe that grandchildren have of their grandparents. It's a natural thing. You get your turn for that. You'll get your grandchildren. If God willing, you will get your turn. But to see that and to honor that and to allow them that exposure to their grandparents, and even though you think maybe sometimes, oh my goodness, now it's not a good time, well then start talking about it. Start putting boundaries in place, because grandparents, when they spoil, can sometimes, like my grandfather, I think that one sweet, that one hard-boiled sweet, maybe the ice cream was a bit over the top, but the sweet wasn't that much of a problem. For a very hungry kid, that might just calm them down for a half an hour or so and make them much more enjoyable to be around. But sometimes they do go over the top. And to say that in a loving way, to say, well, maybe you could give them the sweets to have after lunch. Maybe open it up with them, give them 1 or 2 bites or 1 or 2 sweets in the package, but not everything. Be honest with your parents. Be honest with them and open and share with them your concerns. Some kids can eat up a package of sweets and still have a whole meal, and it's no problem. And others, you can give 1 sweet and they will not eat their meal and they will just wait for the rest of the package. No, they're not hungry. No, they're not hungry. But come 2 o'clock, they want the rest of that package of sweets. And they haven't had their food. And you know it's not good for them. So you are the responsible one. Now, we said that's the nice thing about grandparents. You are not responsible. So you can be irresponsible. Grandparents have the privilege of being irresponsible and doing the fun things that the kids like and bringing that fun thing into the relationship. And it sometimes really creates problems in the relationship. Sometimes we have to really talk to them about it. And unfortunately, some people will not change. Remember that as we grow older, we become more set in our ways. And sometimes someone will just say to you, well, that's my privilege, that's my role as a grandparent, and I'm not going to do it your way. And then it's sad, but then you will have to sit down and say, well, what are we going to do as a couple about this? So sometimes it's necessary to put some distance. Sometimes we have to really sit down and put serious boundaries down and say, this is not acceptable, that's not acceptable. But if you as a grandparent want that exposure, obviously you will try to abide by the rules. One small thing that happened in our life specifically, that I specifically remember, my mother, we were visiting my parents, and my mother had a habit of, in her personal wardrobe, there was always sweeties at the top. So we all knew about that, and we were, as children, do you know how children are trained with sweets? Whenever they hear a specific paper, not all paper, it's like they have this inborn capacity. They have this, that's the sound, they have this inborn ear for a sweet package. They just know it. So if my mother, even when we were children, would stealthily try to eat something on her own in her room, once when the package is open, we're all standing there. We're all there already. So now we come visiting, and we are talking, and she just opens the cupboard, and what happens is our eldest daughter sees the sweets. And she asked for it. Now, we made a rule because we were traveling so much and we were around people so much. I was incredibly strict. My children all knew they were not allowed to ask. They were never allowed to ask for anything. They could ask for water. That was it. They could ask me for anything that they had a need of, and their father, obviously. But they were not allowed to ask anyone else anything, because I did not want them to be a nuisance and to really become naughty and just try and, take advantage of the situation. So they So she saw the sweets and she immediately said, Grandma, can I have a sweetie? And I looked at my mom. My mom said, yes, of course you can have a sweetie. And I mean, she was so excited. And, she's asking me something. She's so excited about this. She was very young then. And I looked at my mother and I said, this is the first time that it's now happened. I want you to know it's a rule in our house. She may not ask. But if you allow her to ask you, I will make an exception. But I also want you to know that if you allow them to ask, they will do it again. And then you will have to cope with the consequences. Because I will now allow her only to ask you if you agree today. And I said it before the child. I said, make up your mind how you want this to play out. Will this still be funny in a few years from now? Is this, you will cope with this rule? She said, no problem. It's my grandchildren, whoever, and if they ask me something, I will say no if I don't want to give. I said, that's fine by me. That's your rule then, but in our house it will not work like that. And it was fine between us. We spoke about it, we were in agreement, and they could ask their grandparents, and they could not ask anyone else. They could ask us, and they could ask my parents, and that was that. And they knew that was the rule. And obviously they tried to now take advantage. When a child sees that in a specific situation, they get away with the rule, or the rule is broken, now they find new places for that rule to be bended or broken. And they want to just have that advantage. So now you will have to be on the lookout, because now they are going to try it in other areas. But I just found that if I just kept explaining very nicely to them, you can do this at your grandparents. It's allowed here, whatever it is that's allowed. You're allowed to do it here, but not anywhere else. And I will punish you. You will be disciplined about it. So don't try it. Then they accept it and they go with it. And they know where the boundaries, it's new boundaries that you set for them. You open up a bit. Remember, we allow them certain things and they stay within that. So you just be strict about the rest. And it can work. Yes, I think if I think personally about grandparents, one of the more serious things that come to mind is not so much the spoiling, because sometimes we are grateful that our parents can buy our kids things that we can't always buy them, so that's nice. But the greater problem is that they do not respect our rules. I think what I see mostly that happen is that, remember we said that in this phase we have absolute authority. It's in the suckling phase, there is no question. It's authoritarian. I say and you do. There's no questions asked. Then when you become a child after weaning, then you can start asking me why, and I will explain to you, because now you are old enough to start understanding. You are not old enough in that phase to understand. So I'm wasting my time, really, I am. So, but when you become a child from the age of 2, 3, 4 years old, now I start explaining to you why I'm saying no. Then when you're an adult, I allow you to make your own decisions up to a certain point, because there are also house rules. And house rules are like the government rules, the laws of the country and the laws of the city. They are there. Regardless of how old you are, you have to abide by those laws. So there are certain areas in your life that you can now take responsibility for and make your own decisions. And then, of course, when they go out of the home, then and they are responsible for their own, they are independent financially, or they get married. Most definitely when they get married, I am no longer allowed to go into that unit. It's a new family unit, and as a parent, I am not allowed, not even to give advice if it's not asked for. I think the simplest way of avoiding any conflict and to have healthy relationships is to avoid at all to even give advice. It's difficult. I am a teacher. So even if it's strangers and I see them having a problem, I try to give advice because I want to help. It's part of my nature. And with my own children, I really have to watch out because they are very sensitive to that thing of, I'm growing up and I don't want your advice anymore, and I don't care if you are a teacher by nature, if that's your gift and your calling, I don't care. You are trying to tell me what to do, and they don't see that it's just being me. So I really try to make a point of, after a certain age, of not doing that, and especially when they have their own homes. I don't go in there and I don't tell them how to run their household. But grandparents don't always do that. Unfortunately, if I look back, my parents and parents-in-law were of the opinion, as all parents of that generation, that you stay the parent. They did not have these boundaries that we are now seeing, but that is better for families. They saw this whole family patriarch and even matriarch. I am older and I'm your parent, and you are supposed to listen to me. If you don't listen, you don't respect me and you are disobedient. So we would have situations where they would laugh about it. It was fun. They would laugh about it, but the two mothers would team up against me. They would come visit together and they would say, yeah, you know, these children of today, they don't listen to you. And they would think, now I know they're talking about me. It's obvious. I mean, there's no, that's it. I'm the child here now and I'm not listening. So the irony in the situation is they don't have the same opinion, even about the same subject. Now, who do they think I must obey? Because if I start choosing either of their advice, I'm in trouble anyway. There's no going around that. So do you see how silly it becomes? It becomes almost impossible to keep pleasing people. I mean, you and your husband comes from different families, and even everyday living situations are different. And then when you get married, when the husband is working, when the wife is also working, when the husband is even working from home, situations differ and families differ. We do things in a different way. People's personalities differ. Their gifts differ. Some families like to do sports together. They go from sports event to sports event. Some go to all the cultural and the dramas and the movies, and others to the musical things. And there are things that people expose their children to that I have almost not even heard of in life. And I think, oh, that's cool, but it's not part of my circle. I can now decide to make it part of my circle, but that will definitely mean that my parents know nothing about that kind of lifestyle. And so we grow up and we change, we go outside our parents' home and we start living lives that are not the same anymore. And now they come back in our homes and they see us doing things a certain way and they say, why do you do it that way? Because we do not do it that way. We did not raise you to do it that way. But it's not necessarily wrong. It's silly things, like the times we go to bed at night, the times we get up in the mornings, the times we eat, the times we have snacks, what we have for snacks, the kind of food we eat. It's everyday living things. We have a joke in our family because me, my mother, and my mother-in-law are all very perfectionistic, especially about the way we hang our washing. Because that, if we do it well, and that's all three of us are of the same opinion, that if we do it in a specific way, it reduces the amount of ironing. It makes sense. The only problem is all three of us found a different way in which to hang the washing. So I came to the conclusion that the best way is to be honest with him and say, listen, Mommy, when I'm in my mother's home, I hang her washing the way she wants it done. I know how she wants it done, and it's her clothes. I respect her, and I hang it up in the way she wants it done. When I get to my mother-in-law, I do it the way she wants it done. And then I've told them, please respect me, because I do it differently. Now, if they still do it their way and they come visiting with us, it's fine. But if they try to tell me to do it in their way, I find that not nice. It tells me I'm a child. I'm not a grown-up. I mean, and for people to still tell their 40 and 50-year-old children and 60-year-old children for that matter, this is the way you should do it, that's not fair. Because we are different and we each find different ways. And of course, if we draw it through, because now this is the ordinary ways, now what about raising children? And often it becomes a problem. And to sit down and be honest. And there was a time when I remember some of the family are very, very strong personalities, and we had to sit down and say, listen, if you want us to make a decision between our new family and you, that decision is already made. We have a responsibility with these children, and they are now our family. So if you want us never to come to you again, you are forcing us to do that. But we don't want to do that. Just respect and honor us. But we feel so strongly about the decision we've made in this specific situation, we will pack our bags and you will never see us again. So stop interfering, please. We are asking you very nicely. Don't do that. And that was the end of that. I think they see, listen, you've drawn a line. It's the same as with children. You've drawn your line, lovingly told them, I respect you, I honor you, but we have made this decision. You have to give us the opportunity to try this. We haven't just made it lightly, we've prayed about it. It's our children. We want the best for them. We love them. We will not make a decision that's not good for them. And if you really feel we've made a bad decision, come talk to us about it. And then, if you are now the grandparents and your children tell you something like that, you are not without resources. You can still go back to God and say, Lord, these children of mine, open their eyes and let them see what they're doing wrong. And if you are right, He will open their eyes. But maybe He will tell you, listen, I think they've got a nice idea. Let them run with it. And we all make mistakes. Sometimes we must just let each other make the mistake. But it's not so easy. So, in conclusion, I want to say that grandparents are one of the biggest blessings that we can possibly have as a family. In terms of the time, the resources, the support system they provide, the prayer, the wisdom they provide. They are a source of so many things in relationship, and the kids are so much poorer if they do not have them. So enjoy them, but sometimes we have to put boundary lines in place and talk about a specific thing and be firm, be loving, but be firm and say, no, I'm sorry, but this thing we have to do our way. Don't be inconsiderate. Don't make it over silly little things. Find a way around the small things that you don't like them doing with your children or whatever. But if it's issues, if it's really important, be firm and make it count. Don't make an issue of nothing. But if it's important, and if it's important to you, maybe something like the kids going to bed at a specific time, whatever it is that or the school they go to, or whatever it is in life that you feel this is important enough and we've made a decision, then you've made your decision. Be firm with it. They have to respect. And if you just, let me say, if you draw those boundary lines in love, and they know that you're not always just doing that, they will come. They may not talk to you for a while, and they may be a bit grumpy for a while, but deal with it. Just give them love, but stick to your point. Keep that boundary in place. And they will come around eventually. When they see, especially when they see the results, they'll come around and everything will be restored again.